Welcome back, everyone. We are in our fall 2024 cohort of ReFre5hed, the podcast. I'm Victoria Pappas.
I'm Kevin Heyman.
And we have a new co-host with us.
And I am Kristen Fantry.
Yay! Yay! As I throw my hands up in the air, nobody's going to see it. I'm so excited to have you with us.
Very excited to be here.
So, for those of you who might be new to listening to us, our podcast has run for about 2 years now, give or take. And I can't believe it's been that long, honestly.
That's pretty wild, actually, yeah.
The thought of just running a podcast in the beginning was like, okay, hopefully it's not awkward. But I think we've come a long way since then.
Yeah, I think we did pretty all right. Pretty good
We
job.
still have listeners.
Yeah.
So thank you for listening, for everyone who's listening, right? So with that said, just to kickstart this, and I know it'll be as part of our Google Classroom discussions and all of that, but each episode, each track will be about 20 to 25 minutes in length, and there will be a discussion question or questions that you'll answer. Feel free to answer those questions, but also talk about whatever spoke or resonated with you most in the track as well. And we've decided to kickstart this podcast episode about student engagement. So it's, I will say, a hot topic. It's been a hot topic for a long time now. I think that every article, every book, every story that I hear has to do with student engagement and what we can do to keep it on the rise. So I think for starters, we'll talk about what it actually means, because I think that when we're talking about student engagement, it's, there's a couple of definitions, and I think it means a little something different to everyone.
Yeah, I think the tricky part is that when engagement and compliance are mistaken for each other. So I think sometimes when students are looking at you and they're watching you walk back and forth across the room, they might even be asking and answering questions that we sometimes think that they are engaged when really they're planning their weekend and thinking about other things, pretty much everything else besides the lesson. So that's like something we have to really be focused on and think about, what does engagement actually mean?
And I think that compliance is a huge part. I think that, especially for Kristen and I, so Kristen is our district mentor, and so she's in and out of classrooms just like I am. And I think that just because the kids are smiling and laughing, sometimes we can say, oh, they're super engaged, right? And I think that that's part of it, right? But I think it goes even deeper than that. And I think you had like an acronym for compliance.
Yeah, there's this acronym called SLANT, right? So it stands for what it looks like when they're just compliant. So they're sitting up, they're listening, they're asking and answering questions, and then they're tracking the speaker. We have all sat in meetings where we have done all of those things, and we know what's actually in our minds, right? We're thinking about the 15 things we have to do when we get home, or planning, what we're doing in our class tomorrow, and we're not actually hearing what the speaker is saying, even though we may be giving those cues and looking like we're listening. So I think that's like classic compliance right there.
Right. And I think that when I hear about student engagement or talk about the topic, there's three things. There's a couple of ways to really talk about this, but one, I feel like it's when someone's engaged, even if it's not student engagement, right? Just between us, there's a spark of curiosity. And if that spark isn't there, I think you can easily just lose someone, even in a day-to-day conversation. I'm thinking even in being a mom, right? And I have a 4-year-old at home. If I want to teach him about something, and if I don't get him excited, he's just going to do something else. He'll get a toy and he'll play with the toy. And if I'm trying to teach him an important lesson, I need to bring him in. I need him to get excited about something. Just yesterday, actually, he kept talking about camping because he watched an episode on Bluey, of course. For those of you who know Bluey, it's a fan favorite in my house, I will say.
Yeah.
And there was an episode about Bluey going camping, and he just kept talking about camping. And in my mind, I'm like, I'm not a camper. I'm not going camping. That's just not something I'm willing to actually
Why, you
do.
don't like bugs?
The backyard. Do it in the
Well,
backyard.
so this is exactly what we did. So I was like, okay, let's create some sort of experience for my son without actually going camping.
Yeah.
Maybe when he's older, my husband will take him. I don't know. That's just not my thing. But we got a tent and we put it in the yard. And now he wants to know more about camping.
Very
and
cool.
I think that just sparked his excitement about it.
Man, that's awesome.
So it comes up a lot with teachers in relation to behavior in the classroom, right? Because if you're not engaged in what's going on, you're going to goof off with your friends and you're going to talk and you're going to get yourself in trouble. So teachers are always asking, like, how do I keep them engaged? And it's the end result, right? Is better behavior, a better behaved class. So it is about sparking that curiosity. And just instead of saying, here's what we're going to learn today, right? That's the boring way to introduce a lesson. The more exciting way is to let them walk in, and maybe there is a tent set up in the classroom, or there's tablecloths all over the desks and you're doing a book tasting, right? Like that's a common one we've seen with libraries and elementary school classrooms. But just something where they walk in and they go, what are we doing today? What's going on? That sparks that interest, right? So curiosity is one. Mysteries or problem solving is another great way to spark engagement. I've talked to my teachers about like the mystery bag, where you have a garbage bag and you just have random items in it and you start taking them out and you're talking to the kids and you're like, what do you think was going on? Like, I found this garbage bag in front of my house, and you start taking things out and they have to sort of create this story or this narrative around the items that are in the bag. Or even just having some sort of novelty, right? If you're doing math, instead of doing it in the notebook, I used to do math on the windows of my classroom with dry erase markers. And just the fact that they could write on the windows they thought was the coolest thing. And that kept them engaged in what was going on. So people always think they have to be super creative. And I don't think you need to be super creative. I think you just need to be a little outside the box sometimes.
Absolutely. And that kind of leads into the three areas that I think student engagement kind of divides into. So there's that behavioral component that you spoke of, how it's all about participation. If a student is sitting there and just looking and smiling and they look like they're enjoying themselves, it's not really student engagement, right? We want students to be participating. We want their involvement in the class, and we need them to come. Attendance is a huge one too. But then there's the second one that I can think of is that emotional part of it. We want them to feel safe in our space. We want them to feel a sense of belonging, and we want that motivation factor for them. I know that just relating it, I always like to relate things back to my own life. If I don't feel a sense of belonging, or if I'm not feeling like this situation is right, you're not going to get much participation out of me, right? And I
That's
think
a comfort level, I think, with the teacher and the other students in the room. If you feel like you don't know everybody well enough, you're not going to speak up, you're not going to take chances, you're not going to put your thoughts and opinions out there, right? So I think that's all about creating that welcoming environment. Right.
And then the last piece would be the cognitive part. So making sure that there's that perseverance to keep learning, the want and desire to keep learning. If it's just like, okay, check the box, we're done here, we're going to the next topic. There are students that are going to be more apt to want to learn one topic than another topic, and you need to keep that going. And I know that Kevin can probably relate a lot of this to IT. Like, can you tell us a little bit about what sparked your interest in IT to get involved with it?
It's funny enough, just having a teacher at school, keeping my interest in things like that, and participating in lessons and things of that nature, taking things apart, basically keeping my focus and engaged in the topic of technology when I was younger kind of caught my eye, which kind of led my path to this field. And I think that's like, it's funny because the lessons that I guess kids and even all of us have learned throughout our lives translates to like work environment too, things like that. Obviously you're going to get more productivity out of people when you have investment in your team and people engaged in what they're doing and enjoying what they're doing. So obviously in the classroom that is a huge factor. I know here in Connecticut, a couple of things that I can think of on the technology side that I think we've mentioned some of these tools before, but things that I know of personally of examples to kind of keep engagement going in the classrooms for teachers with the students. We have Securely Classroom. I know that was like a very big tool that we were kind of promoting a few years ago, and tons of teachers are out there using it to keep the kids engaged on the task at hand in the class. It gives them the teachers the ability to kind of block the distractions if they're in the middle of using their Chromebooks and they're trying to browse something else while they're teaching. It's a very useful tool for, I feel like, the teachers themselves as well as the kids to keep their focal point of what they're supposed to be doing. Recently, I just mentioned this to both Kristen and Victoria before we started recording, is that our broadcast journalism class that we have here at the high school, they have tons of footage that they're sitting there recording and editing days at a time for Thunder Vision and other projects that they're working on. But after a while, I could relate in certain ways when you're staring at a computer screen for a little bit of time. Sometimes you take a little bit of a break, and then it's more of roping them back in, focus back on the project. So one of the teachers that's teaching that class actually had approached me, hey, is there any sort of tool that I could potentially utilize to kind of rope them back in, get them focused on it, so they're not, going on YouTube looking at nonsense versus pulling raw footage for their projects. So I worked alongside him, and what we did is we got him a license to a program called Net Support, and it works similar to Securely, but just in a little bit of a different manner. And it's more for the Macs that are in that broadcast journalism class. But yeah, it's another tool to try to help the teachers make that connection and keep the students on task. I feel like I just went on a rant there, but
no, that's fine.
We'll take it. I think the technology piece is really important, because I know I have a lot of teachers that are a little bit leery sometimes about incorporating technology, because we all know there are times that technology fails, right? And so that's a classic time in the classroom when you would then have disengagement. Right. Some things, they planned on showing this video or using this program, and now we can't get in, and the teacher's trying to troubleshoot. So I think both you, Kevin, and Victoria are so important when teachers want to use that technology to be able to incorporate it seamlessly. Sure. So there is no downtime where the kids are not disengaging, right? Because it's one thing to have that task where you have to get kids engaged, but then it's an uphill battle if they're disengaged or negatively engaged, and now you've got to get them, really get the buy-in from them. So to be able to bring things in seamlessly and have an extra pair of hands like Victoria or something to incorporate something into a project, it's great, right? Because you're so much less worried about that and then losing the kids in the midst of something.
When you just said that, I thought of my first year teaching experience in a pre-K classroom, where the only piece of technology that I had was a classroom computer, but regardless, part of our day was structured in centers, right? So we had to teach the kids first and foremost what the centers were, and then how are we going to rotate and transition between centers. And if you think about having 3 and 4-year-olds in a classroom and telling them to rotate and transition, it's difficult. And even though they have a new activity that they're going to, just that transitional piece in the classroom totally just, even if you had the bell set, it was just, you needed them to just do it seamlessly so that you didn't completely lose them. Then the behaviors start, then they're getting off task, and all of these elements. So I think the transitional piece of the classroom is huge. I think that you can lose students just by transitioning from one activity to another.
Oh, absolutely.
Even in the high school, if I'm pushing into a room and the bell rings and just grabbing them in, okay, we need to start. That can be the most challenging piece.
Yeah. I always feel like any lesson, and especially when you're focused on engagement, is a performance. Yeah. Right? That there is like this framework, and that's one of the books. Weston Kieschnick, Educator's Atlas, is one of his books, and he sort of lays out this framework. But even before I had that acronym to put to it, I always felt like there was this arc that you follow. So he says you have the attention getter. It's the Atlas spells out, right? The T is for the transition. The L is for the lesson, the bulk of what you're going through. then that activity where the kids are doing the hands-on piece and they're utilizing what you just taught them in the lesson, and then the summation where you bring it all back together and essentially you're the closure of your lesson. So I think if you start with that framework and you sort of fill in those little pieces, it's an easier way to design a lesson and say, okay, how am I going to be engaging at each one of these steps?
Right. And I think sometimes, like, of course, props help. Like, I'm going to go back to our Gmail training, right? So we went across the district, did our Gmail training.
Yep.
I don't know if a lot of the progression was about what we were showing on the screen, right? But we all had matching Gmail shirts.
Yep.
And I think the first thing that people see are, hey, they're a team, we have Gmail shirts, and I'm glad that, Nikki Clinch actually designed those, made those up for us. And I think that's just part of it.
And that you're having fun while you're up there, right? Like, if you're having fun presenting it, then the audience is also having some fun.
Exactly. And then the other piece that I wanted to mention is, just as you said, Kristen, is it's all about the delivery, right? So, again, going back to the Gmail training, we could have all the slides in the world, and it's really great to go back to and reference and everything, but it's all about the delivery. I just went and completed with Nikki Frank Martin our Chromebook 101s for grades 2 and 3. And especially for them, it was just about the energy coming into the room. It was a different face. It was a different energy that they might have not been used to.
Right.
You had to get them. I was like, are you guys so excited to be using these Chromebooks? Like, what do you even know about Chromebooks? And they're like, what do you mean, what do we know about Chromebooks? We know about it. I'm like, okay, prove it to me, you know? And it was just that
it's the energy.
Conversation that we had about it. And then I said, okay, listen, I'm not completely the guru. I know maybe a little bit here and there. I said, but I want to teach you some things. I want to teach you about safety, and I want to teach you about, some things that you can do while you're actually on the Chromebook. And they were super excited. That's awesome. And again, I don't think it had to do with the pictures on the slide, the words on the slide. It's about what you're actually presenting to them and how you can connect, making those connections with them.
Right.
I think it's about relating to your audience no matter what, whether it's kids or adults, whatever it is. It's kind of like, being one with them in a situation.
And an enthusiasm for it, like you said, and just creating this atmosphere. I had a teacher in high school here at Connecticut, Mr. Delacave. He taught sociology, and he was known for his storytelling, which is like an engagement technique, right? That's one that we use even now. He used to tell these long, drawn-out, elaborate stories. There was one in particular about his
you're
first...
You're going to remember them,
right? 25 some odd years later, right? So he had one about his wife and their first date at Maison Olay and how his car was haunted. And it was this very elaborate thing. And you're like, what does this have... The whole period, what does this have to do with sociology? And then the bell would ring, and it's like the pinnacle of the story, and you're on the edge of your seat, and he's like, I'll tell you the rest tomorrow. And you're like, what? The whole class, loses their mind. And in the end, it's all about, social norms in society, and he did always bring it back to sociology, but, you were on the edge of your seat. He didn't have a prop. He didn't have any technology. He didn't have anything, no screens, nothing on the board. It was just his personality and that ability to draw you in through storytelling, which is amazing. That's something that takes practice as well.
Were you with me at the last conference? Did you go with me to see Weston?
Yes.
So he did the
I was fangirling out about the whole thing. Do you remember?
The mnemonics and stuff. So the keynote speaker was Weston. You'll hear us reference him a lot just because we both read his books, and
he's a dynamic speaker. He's great to listen to begin with. Yeah,
absolutely. And one of the sessions that
the breakout after.
The breakout after. That's he was telling a story about an open house that he went to in his neighborhood. And he told us about every single room in the house.
And he said, I open the door and these two kids are sitting here doing a puzzle, and I step over them and I go to the right. And he was so descriptive, and you're picturing this house now in your mind.
Right, exactly. And the whole time, I'm so engaged in the story, and I'm remembering all these little things about the two kids on the floor doing the puzzle, and then I think he went into the kitchen, and it smelt. The aroma was he spoke about the aroma of the kitchen and all these different parts. And part of me in the back of my mind was where is this guy go? I'm at a conference.
Yes. But you're also he's on. I know there's a method here.
I know he's, he's reputable, but where is he going? And he was literally just modeling the teaching strategy that just got me hooked.
But within the story, do you remember there were elements of, he mentioned numbers and different things in the story that then came back to the concept that he was trying to teach us. Right. He said something about, they were doing a puzzle and there were X number of pieces, and that number was significant in the concept that he wanted to show us. So, and he went back and he said in the story, these are all the elements that connect to things. Right. But we totally had the recall on the story, and so now you've learned that concept and you've learned all those key facts that he wants you to know.
And literally, how many months later, we're repeating the same story.
Yeah. Like actual elements
and it's
from
about a random open house in Colorado, I think,
Yes. And I believe he even said he chose an open house scenario because everyone has a mental image in their minds of the layout of a house. Like it was a relatable thing that he could use to structure the story, which I thought was so cool.
It was cool. That's the one thing that came. When I think of teaching strategies and student engagement, I always go back to when we saw him do that and model that because, and I will say the whole crowd was just on edge, what happened in the next room? But think about it, why do we care about this random open house in Colorado, but he really got us hooked.
And he told it with enthusiasm too. Yes. It was the way that he presented it that he was like, so this house finally goes up for sale and my wife and I are thrilled and we're like, we're going in, we're going to check it out. Yeah. So he drew you in with his own enthusiasm too, which is cool.
And it's something that it was just a common conversation that couples would have, or, so very, very cool. And I want to leave off with one thing, and that's regarding technology in the classroom for student engagement. So I think that a lot of us say, okay, we're going to give kids technology, they're going to be automatically engaged. And as the educational technology specialist for the district, I'm going to say that is not true. No way, right? So, again, I'm going to go back to my first year in teaching pre-K. Sometimes they would get a little rowdy because they're 3 and 4 running around. There was 18 of them. The bell has rung. That's a tradition. That's a tradition.
Every time.
We'll be right back. And we're back.
Perfect. The holes are clear. The bell will not ring for another 40 minutes or so. That's right. So I think we're good. So back to what I was saying was that, again, when I was in my first year of teaching, the only technology device that I had was the one teacher computer. So me just having my own personal passion for technology at that time was just how am I supposed to use this one singular device with the 18 kids in my room to engage them, and at that point, I didn't know about all the tools that are out from now. So basically it was just interactive video without it being interactive video. So I would say, okay, we are learning about the letter A. I showed them a video and I would stop it. And I would say, please repeat after me, ah, and they would say, ah, and we would keep going. But now, just thinking about all the tools that can include student engagement, and, I think there are so many. The main one would be Nearpod. They're known for student engagement just because of the interactive elements that they have. They have, the interactive video component, which also Edpuzzle has. They have Time to Climb, which is a short multiplication game.
Right, that's a competition between students, right?
Exactly. There's the Draw It slide, where they can just draw, you can give them a prompt and they're drawing about it, or you can embed a PDF and they can annotate over it. And I think that part of student engagement being participation, this lends itself to seeing how are my students actually doing with the content.
Right, and I think we've talked about this ad nauseum. I think though that you have to lead with the concept, right, and then find the technology that complements that, and instead of the other way around, right? We don't start with Nearpod or start with, some of those other things that you mentioned, and then say, how can I build a lesson around this? Exactly. So that's just best practice to be able to start with that concept that you want them to learn and the lesson, and move forward. But yeah, there's so many things to pick from now, and we're so lucky. I think
we are lucky. Just look in ClassLink. You'll see what there is. Check out GimKit if you haven't already. That's all I'm going to say. I'll leave it with that.
I just wanted to mention anybody who wants to read up a little bit more on engagement. And
Okay.
these are 2 books about teaching specifically, but I do think they lend themselves to all areas of life. Like if you just present, as part of your job, they're helpful to look at. It's Teach Like a Pirate, of course, by Dave Burgess, and then The Educator's Atlas by Weston Kieschnick. And they both have a very actionable plan about things that you can do to be more engaging as a presenter.
Awesome. I've read both. They are both amazing. Teach Like a Pirate is exciting because it's actually talking about creating experiences
Yes.
with your students. So that's definitely a book that I highly recommend.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Especially for all new teachers, but veterans as well. Just makes you rethink some things and how you do stuff.
Yeah, and sometimes, I was just talking to someone and I said, I've been with ConnectQuad for about 10 years total between my BOCES time and stuff. And, the one thing that I love about this job is that it's never the same, like from year to year.
Right.
So, but I can understand that if you were teaching a certain grade or a certain topic year after year, sometimes within your own self-reflection, you can say, like, how am I changing this up?
Right.
Like, even you need to be engaged in what you're teaching. So
Yes.
how are we changing this up? So we are all here for you. Also,
Yeah.
so if you
Absolutely.
need anything, we're only an email away.
Absolutely.
And I think that wraps it up, guys.
All right.
Sounds good to me.
Thanks
Student
for
engagement.
listening. We'll see you next time.
See ya.